Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight we're going back to a quiet valley tucked deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a place where time moved slowly and progress rarely found the road in. It's the 1930s and the Great Depression has settled over the hollers like a fog that doesn't lift. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair plus other sleep tools in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You've lived your whole life inside these hills. When you wake, they're the first thing you see, rising like green walls against the morning mist, folding one over another until the sky looks trapped between them. You know their shapes by heart. The ridge that holds dawn a little too long. The hollow where fog lingers past noon. The narrow gap where the road curls and disappears. You've never been over all of them. You don't need to be. The holler is your whole map, and the world beyond it might as well be drawn in smoke. When you step outside, the air already carries yesterday's scent. Wood smoke, wet earth, and the faint sweetness of decaying leaves. Your boots sink into the soft edge of the yard, where moss has replaced grass. Somewhere beyond the trees, the creek talks to itself, low and steady, like it has secrets too old for words. You hear the rhythm before you see it, water sliding over stones, never hurrying, never resting. Sometimes you think the creek remembers more than the people do. Its voice was here before the cabins, and will be here long after they've fallen in. The valley wakes in pieces. First, a rooster calls from a neighbour's yard, then a hammer strikes somewhere down the road. A dog barks, sharp and impatient, answered by another farther off. Sound doesn't travel straight here. It bends, tumbles, and returns in softened echoes that make the holler feel both endless and enclosed. You breathe the air and feel the damp settle into your clothes, the way it always does, the way it always will. This is what morning feels like where the mountains keep you. Not a beginning, just another turn in a circle that never ends. You know how the light behaves. It slides slowly down the slopes, skipping the ridges before it reaches the creek bed. The sun takes its time crossing these hills, and you've learned to live by its patience. There are only a few hours each day when the valley feels fully lit, when colours sharpen and the world looks alive instead of half asleep. Then the shadows start to stretch again, and the place folds itself back into twilight. You've never seen the ocean, but you imagine it moves the same way. Waves of shadow and light, flowing over the same ground forever. The road that runs past your cabin isn't much of a road at all. 2 ruts carved into clay, hard in summer, bottomless in spring. You've walked it more times than you can count. To fetch water, to trade eggs, to visit the store when credit allows. Each turn hides what comes next, but never for long. Every path in this valley loops back eventually. When you were younger, you used to think that meant the world was kind, that it always brought you home. Now you understand it's just the land's way of keeping you close. The train whistle cuts through the stillness once a day, sometimes twice. You never see the train itself, just the smoke drifting above the treetops and the echo bouncing off the ridges. It sounds lonely, like a voice calling out from somewhere you'll never reach. People say it runs north, all the way to cities where the streets are flat and the nights shine with light instead of stars. You try to picture it sometimes, the movement, the noise, the distance, but it feels more like imagining a story than a place. Here everything moves slow, and distance means something different. You crouch by the creek to wash your hands, cupping the cold water against your skin. The shock of it clears the last of sleep from your eyes. Across the current, sunlight catches on wet stones, glinting like coins you'll never own. The banks are lined with laurel and fern, and if you look closely, You can see the faint tracks of raccoons or foxes in the mud. The hills may hem you in, but they're alive, not cruel, not kind, just watching. You feel them pressing close the same way you feel a heavy quilt on your chest at night. A weight that's both comfort and confinement. Every family in the Holler lives under that same weight. The mine downriver keeps most of the men busy and most of the women worried. Smoke from its tipple drifts through the valley, a thin grey ribbon that smells of sulphur and sweat. But even that smoke feels familiar now, part of the air you breathe. You've grown used to it the way you've grown used to everything else. The long walks, the damp clothes that never dry, the aching silence that fills the gaps between sound. When you think of home, you think of that silence first. From where you stand, you can see the other cabins scattered along the slopes, each one half hidden by trees. Some lean slightly, roofs patched with tar paper or tin. Others look almost new, though nothing stays that way long. You know who lives in each by the sound of their dogs, the colour of their laundry, the smell of what's cooking when the wind changes. In summer, the smoke from all those stoves blends into one slow-moving haze that hangs over the valley like breath. In winter, the smoke turns white and rises sharper, as if straining to escape the cold. The trees mark the seasons better than any calendar. Spring pushes them into leaf overnight, a green so bright it hurts to look at. Summer thickens the air, until even the birds sound tired. Autumn burns through in a single gust, red, orange, gold, before the leaves darken and fall. By winter, the hills are bare again, ribs showing through their skin. You've watched that cycle enough times to stop expecting anything different. The changes only prove how little changes at all. Evening always comes sooner than you think. The hills steal the sun before the sky says it's time. The light goes amber, then brown, then gone. You can smell the first fires starting, oak, hickory, sometimes pine if that's all that's left. The creek turns darker, the sound of it deeper. Somewhere across the valley, a fiddle starts to play, slow and uncertain, the tune wobbling through the damp. You pause for a moment and listen, half tempted to hum along. The music isn't cheerful, but it's alive. That's enough. Smoke begins to rise from a few chimneys, thin threads twisting into the cooling air. The first whippoorwill calls from the edge of the woods, and your hound stirs by the porch, lifting his head to listen. You follow the road until the trees part and your own cabin comes into view. It meets you like an old friend, worn, dependable, and full of small complaints. It sits low to the ground beside the creek, its boards darkened by decades of weather and smoke. The steps sag just enough to make you shift your weight carefully when you climb them. When you push open the door, the air inside feels different from the air outside. Thicker, quieter, touched by the faint smell of coal oil and damp wool. It's the smell of the stove that never quite goes cold, of wet boots left to dry, of a house that's always breathing but never resting. The room has no secrets. One glance and you can see the whole of your life. The bed pushed against the wall, the stove in the corner, the table patched with mismatched boards, the few shelves crowded with jars, tin plates, and folded fabric. Your wife moves near the stove, sleeves rolled, hair pinned up in a loose knot that's come undone in places. The coffee pot rattles softly, where it sits on the iron grate, and she nudges it with a rag before turning back to knead the dough waiting in the bowl. The smell of flour and lard mixes with smoke, heavy but comforting. On the floor near her feet, your youngest, a girl of about 5, builds a lopsided tower from corn cobs and sticks, whispering to herself as if the game depends on secrecy. Her brother, older by 3 years, leans against the doorframe with one hand on a toy he whittled himself, staring out toward the creek as though something out there might change if he watches long enough. The sounds of them, quiet, constant, familiar, settle into the hum of the room until they feel as much a part of the cabin as the walls themselves. Everything inside has a story older than you, The table was built by your grandfather from pine he cut himself. The quilts were stitched by your mother before her fingers stiffened with age. The enamel coffee pot has been blackened by years of boiling and never once truly scrubbed clean. The tin roof above you rattles when the wind pushes down the valley, and when rain comes, it becomes its own kind of music. Loud at first, then softer, like the hills are drumming just to remind you they're still there. The floorboards groan under every step, and the draft that slips through the cracks along the wall is familiar enough to ignore. You know where to stand in winter to feel the heat, and where to place the basin so it doesn't catch the drip from the ceiling when the thaw begins. Each object here carries a quiet defiance. The rocking chair by the door has been mended so many times it rocks unevenly, yet it remains where it's always been. The kerosene lamp sits beside a chipped Bible, both handled with equal care. The shelves hold jars of beans, cornmeal, and pickled vegetables, each sealed with wax your wife poured by hand. Against the far wall hangs a line of clothes, your son's patched overalls, your daughter's small dress, your own shirt with its elbows gone thin. Nothing matches, but everything belongs. The cabin feels stitched together the same way your lives are, piece by piece with whatever the hills will give. You spend more time tending to the house than you ever admit. The fire has to be coaxed each morning. The wood split fine so it catches quick. The water comes from the creek, carried up the slope 2 buckets at a time, sloshing cold against your knees. The dishes are washed in a tin basin. The grey water thrown out the door, where nothing ever grows. When the weather turns mean, you stack wood under the eaves and chink the walls again, filling the gaps with clay and scraps of cloth to keep the wind from finding the children's beds. The rhythm of it all becomes second nature. Haul, mend, patch, repeat. Even silence feels like part of the work. You watch your wife move between chores with the same patient rhythm she's always had. Her hands never stop, mending a sleeve, turning dough, wiping a child's nose without looking up. There's no rush in her motions, only endurance. She hums sometimes, low and tuneless, just to keep her mind steady. When she glances toward you, it's not for conversation, but confirmation. That the fire's still burning, the roof's still holding, that the day hasn't taken anything new from you. The children orbit around her without needing instruction. They know when to speak and when to vanish into the yard, when to quiet down as the daylight thins. Life in the holler doesn't teach patience, it demands it. The light in the cabin shifts with the hours, sliding from gold to grey, touching everything differently before it fades. Dust drifts through the beams like snow that forgot to fall. The old window pane bends the world outside into rippling shapes. Creek water, laurel leaves, the faint glint of someone's wash line fluttering in the breeze. You can smell supper long before it's ready, beans thickening on the stove, cornbread browning in the pan, the sharp edge of coffee burned just a little too long. The scent fills every crack in the room, settling over the quilts and into your hair. Even hunger feels quiet here, more habit than hardship. When the rain begins, the roof answers immediately. A soft clatter, then a steady drumming that grows as the clouds move closer. The children press their palms to the window and watch the drops race each other down the glass. You patch another spot in the wall where the wind sneaks through, and your wife shakes her head, amused that you still try. You both know the cabin leaks, no matter what you do, but doing something feels better than giving up. The sound of the storm blurs with the hiss of the fire, and the house breathes easier once everything outside is hidden. Night comes quietly, the same way it always does, not sudden but certain. The last of the daylight fades from the window, and the lamp glows warm and small against the dark. Your wife sits near the bed, brushing your daughter's hair, while the boy draws circles in the soot on the stove door. The room smells of wood smoke, soap and skin, tired smells, honest ones. You pour a final cup of coffee and let it cool, untouched, listening to the insects tapping at the window and the creek whispering just beyond the walls. When you finally turn the lamp down, the flame shrinks to a trembling bead before disappearing. The dark folds around you like another blanket. You can hear your son breathing from the corner, your daughter shifting in her sleep, your wife exhaling slowly beside you. Outside, the rain keeps falling, steady and familiar. The morning comes the way it always does, slow, grey and already tired. The rain from the night before has passed, leaving the air cool enough that your breath ghosts in front of you when you step outside. The hills are still wrapped in fog, the kind that clings to the ground like it's got nowhere better to be. Inside, the fire in the stove has burned down to a bed of orange embers. Your wife is already awake, moving quiet as habit, stirring the ashes with the iron poker until they glow again. She hums to herself, the tune low and unhurried, and the sound mixes with the creak of the floorboards as you pull on your boots. You eat quick because there's no reason to linger. The coffee is strong and bitter, boiled in the same blackened pot that's seen more mornings than you care to count. Your wife slides a plate toward you, biscuits and fried salt pork, the kind of meal that will stick with you through a long day. She doesn't sit while you eat. She never does. Her hands are already busy with the day's work, filling buckets at the door, sweeping up the trail of dirt and ash that somehow appears no matter how clean she keeps things. The children stir in the corner, tangled in their quilts. Your son blinks himself awake first, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking out in all directions. The girl follows, yawning so wide you can see the space where her front tooth used to be. You tell them both good morning, and they mumble it back, still halfway in dreams. Outside, the world is still half shadow. The chickens are already scratching near the porch, their feathers damp and dull. You scatter a handful of corn into the yard, and they rush toward it in a flurry of sound. Your son follows you down to the woodpile, bare feet kicking up bits of straw, carrying the smaller pieces of kindling in his arms. He wants to help, though the wood's nearly as heavy as he is. You split the larger logs yourself, the axe biting clean through the grain, the sound echoing off the hills. Each swing feels like punctuation in the morning quiet. By the time the sun reaches the top of the ridge, sweat has already darkened the back of your shirt. You shoulder your tools and start down the narrow path toward the mine. The road curves past a handful of cabins just like yours, each with its own column of smoke, rising steady into the air. You nod to the men you pass, each carrying the same shovel, the same look of endurance. No one says much before work. There's no point. The day will take enough words as it is. The whistle will blow soon, and when it does, you'll all disappear underground, swallowed by the same dark that's been waiting since before you were born. You don't think about it much anymore. It's just the way things are. The valley gives you coal, and you trade it for another day of food and breath. Back at the cabin, your wife settles into her own rhythm. She kneads cornmeal into dough, wipes the table clean, hauls the wash to the creek. Her hands move without hesitation, strong from repetition, careful even when she's tired. The girl follows her for a while, mimicking each motion with the clumsy precision of a child who's still learning the world's weight. The boy returns after feeding the animals, hands already dirty, shirt damp with dew. He stacks the smaller logs near the stove and helps his mother hang the wet clothes across the line strung by the window. The two of them chatter quietly, voices soft enough to blend with the murmur of the creek outside. The day unfolds in its usual order. You work underground, breathing dust and sweat, while your wife and children move through their own kind of labour above. Each task leads into the next without need for thought. Cooking, cleaning, fetching, fixing. Necessity has turned into something close to tradition. The same motions, the same tools, the same gestures passed down through the hands that never had time to stop. Even the silence feels practiced, the quiet that comes from knowing there's no one to complain to, and nothing that complaining would change. The hills keep their secrets, and the people do too. By noon, the sun burns high enough to dry the laundry and warm the porch boards. Your wife sits for a moment, the girl curled against her side, the boy chasing a chicken across the yard with a stick he swears is a sword. She lets herself laugh once, quick and small, before calling him back to fetch water. The sound of her laughter fades as quickly as it comes, swallowed by the steady creak of the bucket pulley and the hum of insects in the grass. Inside, the stew simmers on the stove, thick with beans and onion, its smell filling the one-room house until it becomes the air itself. When you return from the mine, the sun is already lowering behind the ridge. Your hands ache, your clothes smell of earth and sweat and the faint metallic sting of coal. The children meet you halfway up the path, their feet dusty, their eyes bright. The boy carries a jar with 2 lightning bugs inside, their glow flickering in rhythm, like they've learned to share a heartbeat. The girl tugs at your sleeve, proud to show you a new daisy chain she's tied around her wrist. You listen, smiling despite the weight in your limbs. Their voices sound like light after a day underground. Supper is quiet, as it always is. The scrape of spoons, the crackle of the fire, the sighs that come after full bellies. Your wife talks little, though her eyes keep drifting toward you, reading the fatigue in your posture. The children finish before you do, their plates scraped clean. The boy starts to hum a tune he learned from the church gathering last Sunday, soft at first, then louder when his sister joins in. Their voices are uneven but sweet, filling the cabin with a warmth that no stove could match. Later, you sit by the fire with your fiddle, the one that belonged to your father. The strings are old, the bow nearly worn out, but it still plays. You draw it slow, coaxing a tune out of memory. Something simple, something older than words. Your wife hums along as she mends a tear in your son's trousers, the rhythm of her needle matching the rhythm of your bow. The children lie on the floor, tracing patterns in the dust, the glow of the fire dancing across their faces. Outside, the last light fades from the sky, leaving only the silver glint of the creek winding through the dark. When the fiddle falls silent, the only sound left is the soft breathing of your family and the whisper of wind through the trees. You step onto the porch for a moment, easing down onto the worn boards. They creak under your weight, but the sound is familiar, even comforting. The night hums around you, crickets, frogs, the distant bark of a hound somewhere across the ridge. The air smells of wet grass and wood smoke, and the stars above you burn dim through the haze of the day's dust. Your wife joins you for a moment, leaning against the doorframe, arms folded against the chill. Neither of you speaks. There's no need. The sound of the holler fills the silence, a world that doesn't need clocks to tell its time. The insects, the creek, the steady pulse of the night itself, all of it marking another day survived. You take her hand, rough against yours, and feel her warmth. Inside, the children have fallen asleep on the floor, their small bodies rising and falling with the rhythm of the fire's last breath. The porch creaks once more beneath your feet as you rise to go in. You enjoyed the small piece of the evening, but you have to be up early for work again tomorrow. The morning starts before the light does. You wake to the sound of your wife shifting beside you, her breath steady, the quilt heavy across your chest. The stove in the corner still glows faintly from the night's fire, just enough to show the outline of the room. You rise, careful not to wake the children, who are curled together on their pallets near the hearth, their faces half buried in quilts that smell of smoke and soap. Outside, the rooster hasn't yet started, but the world is already waiting. You pull on your shirt, stiff with old sweat and coal dust, and lace your boots while your wife moves quietly to the stove. She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. The rhythm of these mornings has long since lost the need for words. Breakfast is quick and practical. The coffee scalds your tongue. The biscuits taste of lard and ash, and the salt pork leaves its familiar sting of grease on your fingers. Your wife sets your tin lunch pail on the table without looking up. You can hear the children stirring now, your daughter's soft cough, your son mumbling something half-dreamed. The sound tugs at you more than you want to admit. You finish eating, wipe your mouth on the back of your hand, and kiss your wife's forehead as you pass. Her hair smells faintly of smoke and flour. She doesn't tell you to be careful. In a place like this, it's a wish that means too much and changes nothing. The air outside bites cold against your face as you step off the porch. The valley is still grey, the fog not yet burned away. Other men are already moving along the road, their shapes dark and solid in the mist. You fall into step beside them, each man silent, each carrying the same dented lunch pail, the same stooped gait of habit. The only sound is the steady rhythm of boots against mud and the faint whistle of the wind through the trees. The mine waits down in the holler, where the creek bends and disappears behind the slag heaps. Even from here, you can smell it. The bitter mix of coal smoke, damp earth, and oil. It's a smell that seeps into everything. Your clothes, your bed, even your skin. When the whistle blows, it cuts through the morning like a blade. The sound echoes off the hills, bouncing from ridge to ridge, calling every man to the same dark mouth. You join the line at the entrance, handing your brass tag to the foreman, who drops it onto the board with a clatter. The tag means you're inside now. It'll hang there until you come back out. If you come back out. You adjust your helmet, light the small lamp on your cap, and follow the others down into the shaft. The wooden beams above you groan as if the mountain itself were exhaling. The light fades fast. By the time you reach the bottom, the world you left behind might as well be a dream. The air underground feels heavy, close. It carries the taste of dust and old water, and every breath scratches the back of your throat. The lamps cast a weak yellow glow that barely reaches the walls. Shadows hang thick between the beams, trembling with each movement. You can hear the steady drip of water from somewhere above, the faint creak of the supports, the muffled voices of men already at work. The mine breathes around you, slow, uneven, like something half alive. You learn not to listen too closely. Down here, every sound has a twin, a groan from the rock, an echo that could be anything. The dark plays tricks on your ears, makes you imagine the mountain shifting above your head. You settle into your section, the same narrow tunnel you've been working for months. The coal seam runs low, forcing you to crouch until your knees ache. You swing the pick in slow, practiced arcs, striking the wall until chips of black rock fall at your feet. The dust rises thick in the lamp's glow, coating your hair, your hands, the inside of your mouth. You can feel it clinging to the sweat on your skin, turning everything to grit. The only way to keep moving is not to think. Just swing, breathe, swing again. Each blow is a heartbeat. Each pause a reminder of how long the day will be. Now and then you stop to shovel the loose coal into carts. The wheels squeal against the tracks, echoing like screams through the tunnels. A mule passes, led by a boy no older than your son, its eyes dull and clouded from years in the dark. You nod to the boy, and he nods back without speaking. The cart rattles off into another tunnel, its light shrinking to a pinprick, and then gone. Somewhere deeper in the mine, a man coughs, a low, ragged sound that blends with the clatter of picks and the rhythmic thud of shovels. Down here, you measure time by noises, not by clocks. The hours slip past without warning, marked only by the shift of shadows and the ache in your shoulders. At noon, you eat where you stand. The bread is cold, the meat greasy, the water warm from the tin pail. You don't talk much. The men sit or lean against the walls, their faces streaked with soot, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. One tells a joke that no one finds funny, but everyone laughs anyway. It's habit more than humour, something to remind yourselves you're still men and not just parts of the machinery. Then the lamps are relit and the work begins again. By the time the whistle blows for quitting, you've stopped feeling the weight of the pick in your hand. The sound startles you more than it should. It means you've made it another day, and for now, that's enough. You leave the tunnel in a slow line, every man coated in the same black film, indistinguishable except for the way he walks. The air near the entrance smells different, still dirty, but lighter, touched with the faint scent of pine and water. You blink against the grey daylight, eyes watering as the world comes back into focus. Outside, the men gather near the company office to collect their pay. Not in dollars, of course, only scrip, stamped with the company's name, good for use at the company store and nowhere else. The foreman counts the tokens into your hand, his face expressionless, his fingers black to the knuckle. You nod, pocket the scrip, and move on. There's no point arguing with a system older than you. It's as much a part of the landscape as the hills themselves. The walk home is slower than the walk down. Your boots drag through the mud, leaving dark prints that the next rain will wash away. The other men fan out toward their own cabins, each disappearing one by one into the folds of the valley. By the time you reach the creek, your back feels like it's carrying the weight of the whole mountain. You bend to rinse your hands, watching the water turn grey as the dust runs off your skin. The reflection that looks back at you could belong to anyone. Just another face, carved from coal and sweat. When you reach home, the light from the cabin window cuts through the dusk like a promise. The smell of supper drifts through the open door. Beans and cornbread, maybe a scrap of ham if you're lucky. Your daughter's laugh carries across the yard, small and bright against the hum of the crickets. Your wife stands in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron, her face soft in the lamplight. You step inside, and the warmth hits you like mercy. The children look up, grinning through the haze of smoke from the stove. You hang your coat by the door, sit at the table, and take the plates your wife sets before you. The food is simple, the room dim, but for a moment it feels like peace. Outside, the hills close in, the crickets sing, and the world holds still. You eat in silence, listening to the fire crackle and the children whisper. When you finish, you lean back and let your eyes rest on the glow of the lamp. Its light flickering over the rough walls, the patched clothes, the faces of the people who make the work worth doing. Survival looks like stability here, but you know better. It's just the pause between whistles, the small mercy of a night that belongs for now to you. You may go to work at the mine, but your wife stays hard at work at home. Her world doesn't stretch far past the creek or the garden fence, yet somehow it holds more weight than the one you carry underground. While you trade daylight for coal dust, she keeps the family's small corner of the valley alive by hand. Washing, mending, cooking, tending, never still for long. When you look back from the road, you can see her by the wash basin near the door. Sleeves rolled, hair pinned loose. The children beside her, half helping, half playing. Their laughter mingles with the splash of water and the creak of the line where clothes will hang to dry. It looks peaceful from a distance, but you know better than to mistake ordinary for easy. Everything in this valley that looks simple was paid for with someone's back, and it's usually a woman's. Her work doesn't start or stop with daylight. Even when the fire goes out and the dishes are stacked, something always waits, mending, canning, nursing, washing. You've seen her stand at the stove until her legs tremble and then go outside to turn the soil before rain comes. She doesn't complain, not because she doesn't feel it, but because there's no point in giving words to something that never ends. Around here, talking about hardship doesn't ease it. It just takes time away from getting on with it. You think sometimes about what her days must sound like when you're gone, the steady rhythm of the churn, the scrape of the broom across the floor, the splash of water in the bucket as she hauls it up the hill. The mine has its own kind of noise, but the home has another, softer, constant, full of effort no one hears. The women in the holler keep that rhythm alive, each in her own small orbit. Their world stretches from kitchen to garden to creek, from cradle to grave, and somehow they make that small space enough to hold everyone else's life inside it. When you come back early from a rain-out shift one afternoon, you catch her at work in the yard. The sky hangs low and pale, and she's bent over the garden, hands buried in dark soil. She moves slow, pressing bean seeds into the ground, one by one, careful as if each were a prayer. The children help in their own way. Your daughter picking up stones, your son carrying a dented bucket of water from the creek. Their feet and hands are brown with mud, their laughter bright against the heavy air. You stand there for a moment, watching them. The picture of it's so familiar, it feels older than you are. Every meal you've eaten, every breath you've taken began the same way, with hands in the dirt. When she straightens up, she wipes her forehead with the back of her wrist and glances toward you. There's no surprise in her face, just quiet acknowledgement, as if she expected you there all along. You offer to help, though you know she'll wave you off. You've done your part, she says, and that's the end of it. You know she means the mind, the script, the roof over your heads, but sometimes you wonder if those things balance what she gives. It's a question you never ask, because there isn't an answer that would make it fair. Inside, the house carries her mark on everything it holds. The shelves are lined with jars she's filled. Green beans, tomatoes, peaches, each sealed tight with wax. They catch the light from the window and shine like jewels in the dim room. The smell in the air is sharp and sweet. Boiling fruit, hot sugar, and lye soap. It seeps into the walls, the quilts, the skin of your hands. Even the children smell faintly of it, as if they've been preserved right along with the harvest. The kitchen is never still. Pots bubble, knives scrape, and her voice hums softly under it all. Not a tune you recognise, just a habit of sound to keep time with her work. The other women in the holler move the same way. You see them at the creek, skirts hitched up, washing clothes against smooth stones, their hands red from the cold water. They trade news between rinses. Who's expecting, who's sick, who's gone. But the talk never slows the work. When a child is born, they gather like clock hands, each with a task, each knowing exactly when to move. When someone dies, they gather again, washing and dressing the body, setting the candles, folding grief into quiet competence. There's a strength to it that men can't quite understand, a kind that doesn't come from muscle or willpower, but from repetition. They keep the home alive by hand, day after day, and no one outside the valley will ever know their names. You've watched your wife patch shirts until the fabric itself gives up, her fingers flying through the cloth as if trying to outpace time. You've seen her sit by the fire at night, her back bent, her eyes half closed, still sewing while everyone else drifts towards sleep. She works even in silence, her mind still sorting, planning, counting what's left of the sugar, the flour, the soap. Her hands never rest long enough to forget what they're for. You wonder sometimes if she ever dreams, and if she does, whether her dreams are full of motion too. The kitchen is her battlefield, and her sanctuary both. When she scrubs the table, she does it with purpose, as if she's polishing away the weight of another day. The smell of lye soap clings to her skin, sharp enough to sting your nose when you hold her. Her apron is always damp, her hair always falling loose no matter how tight she ties it back. The girl tries to copy her, pulling her own hair into a crooked knot, pretending to stir an invisible pot. The boy rolls his eyes but watches closely anyway, already learning that survival in this place isn't a man's work or a woman's work, it's everyone's. By late afternoon, the air in the cabin grows heavy and still. The fire has burned low, and the children's voices drift from outside, playing somewhere near the creek. You sit by the door, boots off. The ache in your shoulders, a slow reminder of the day's labour. Behind you, Your wife moves quietly through the kitchen, lifting the last jars from the pot. She sets them on the windowsill with careful hands, one after another, until the ledge glows with the colour of summer. Deep red, gold, pale green. The glass catches the fading light, and for a moment the room looks warm enough to forget the cold months waiting ahead. She exhales, rubbing her wrists, and leans against the table, the day finally catching up to her. You can see the fatigue in her shoulders, the way she holds herself, as if she's afraid to stop moving completely. You want to say something, a thank you, a promise, anything, but the words stay where they are. Instead, you stand and take her hand, rough and warm, and she lets you. Neither of you speaks. Outside, the cicadas start their evening chorus. The creek hums its familiar tune, and the scent of boiled fruit and soap still hangs thick in the air. The sun drops behind the ridge, and the jars cool slowly on the windowsill, each one sealing with a soft pop you can hear if you listen close. Those small sounds are victories, proof that the work held, that another season might be survived. The hills darken, the light fades from the glass, and the cabin settles into quiet. She wipes her hands, straightens her apron, and without a word begins preparing tomorrow's work. The day may be done, but in the holler, the keeping never ends. The children wake before the sun most mornings, though not because anyone tells them to. Habit has taken root early in them, the way it does in every child born to the hills. You hear them whispering near the hearth as you lace your boots, their voices soft and bright against the crackle of the fire. Your daughter is trying to braid her hair by herself, tongue pressed against her lip in concentration, while your son crouches beside her, fastening the laces of his two small shoes. He'll outgrow them by summer, though there's no point thinking that far ahead. For now, they fit well enough to walk, and that's all that matters. The cabin is still dim, the only light coming from the stove. Your wife moves quietly behind you, setting tin cups on the table. The smell of cornmeal and smoke fills the room, and outside, the first birds begin to call. Once you leave for the mine, the children spill into the yard, carrying the morning with them. The air is still cool, but the light already has that warm, syrupy look that comes before summer heat. The girl runs barefoot through the grass, her laughter sharp enough to bounce off the trees. Her brother follows close behind, chasing her with a stick that he pretends is a sword. The sound of their feet against the damp earth is light and quick, a rhythm older than the hills. They don't know yet how fast time moves here. Childhood doesn't last long in the holler. It shrinks with every chore, every sickness, every winter. But for now, they still believe the world is wide and kind. Their play is made of scraps and imagination. A broken wheel becomes a millstone for grinding flower petals into pretend flour. 2 empty jars turn into lanterns for their expeditions. Down by the creek, you've watched them build whole kingdoms out of nothing but mud and stubbornness. They argue, they laugh, they make up. Their world stretches no farther than the bend in the stream, but it feels enormous to them. Uncharted, full of secret hiding places and imagined dangers. You sometimes wish you could see it through their eyes again, before you learned what waited on the other side of wonder. School comes and goes the way it always has. When there's work to be done, lessons fall second to chores. The small clapboard schoolhouse sits 3 miles down the road, and they go when weather and need allow. Some mornings the boy walks there barefoot, shoes slung over his shoulder to save the soles from wearing through. The girl trails behind him, carrying a slate board wrapped in cloth. They return in the afternoon, flushed and hungry, talking about numbers and letters and stories of faraway cities they can barely picture. For a while, their words fill the house with something light, a kind of hope you're almost afraid to name. But when winter comes or planting begins, they stay home again, trading pencils for pails and chalk for kindling. Learning takes time, and time is the one thing no one here ever has enough of. By midday, They're part of the work that keeps the house alive. Your son carries buckets from the creek, water sloshing against his legs as he climbs the slope. Your daughter helps her mother hang clothes, her small hands struggling with the heavy wet fabric. They tend the chickens, weed the garden, fetch soap or salt from the shelf when asked. None of it feels strange to them. They've never known another way to live. The chores are as natural as breathing, part of the rhythm of survival that everyone learns early or not at all. When they rest, they don't sit still for long. The creek calls them back, and soon they're gone again, their laughter echoing through the trees. In the heat of summer, they spend hours in the water. The creek runs shallow that time of year, the stones slick and green beneath their feet. They chase minnows, catch frogs, skip flat rocks until their arms ache. The boy once built a raft from branches and twine, only to watch it sink before it reached the bend. He laughed until he coughed, then tried again the next day. The girl collects wildflowers and presses them between the pages of an old Bible, each petal saved like a secret. You sometimes find them later, long after the colours have faded, tucked between the verses about faith and endurance. Maybe that's fitting. In a place like this, both things are lessons worth learning early. The seasons mark them faster than birthdays do. Summer turns their feet brown and their shoulders red. Autumn dusts their hair with the smell of wood smoke and apples. Winter steals their laughter for a while, replacing it with quiet coughing under heavy quilts. Sickness passes through the holler every year. Croup, fever, influenza, and there's never enough medicine to go around. You've carried your son out into the cold night once, his breath shallow, his forehead hot as a stove lid, hoping the air might ease him. You've watched your wife press a damp cloth against your daughter's chest and whisper prayers half remembered from her own mother. The children always recover eventually, but each illness leaves a trace behind. A thinness in their faces, a new kind of stillness in their eyes. Clothes wear out faster than they grow. The boys' overalls are patched so many times that the thread itself has become more cloth than the original fabric. The girl wears dresses cut down from her mother's old skirts, the hems uneven but sturdy. They never complain about what they don't have. They measure luck in smaller things. When the shoes fit, when the creek runs clear, when supper stretches far enough that no one goes to bed hungry. They don't think of themselves as poor, because there's no one rich nearby to remind them. The world they see is all they know, and that makes it enough. Sometimes after you've come home and washed the dust from your face, you find yourself sitting on the porch watching them in the fading light. The hills glow with the last orange of evening, and the air hums with insects. Your wife shells peas beside you, her fingers moving quick and sure, and the children chase fireflies through the tall grass. Their laughter rises and falls like song. The boy catches one in a jar, his face lit gold for a moment, while the girl cups her hands to hold another before letting it go. The sight of them running barefoot through the twilight fills you with a kind of ache that isn't sadness exactly. It's something quieter, older. You know that soon enough the chores will grow heavier, the games will fade, and the hills will teach them the same lessons they taught to you. How to endure, how to keep going, how to let joy flicker only as long as the fireflies do. The light softens as the evening settles in. The jars from the day's canning still rest on the windowsill, cooling in the dark. The children's voices drift closer, slower now, worn out from running. Your wife calls them in, her tone gentle but firm, and they obey without protest. The boy places the jar of fireflies on the porch rail, and the glow inside flickers weakly before winking out. The girl leans against the doorframe, her hair tangled, her bare feet dusty. You rise, stretch your back, and follow them in. Saturday begins like most others, with the same dull ache behind your ribs that the night never quite shakes loose. The children are already outside, their laughter carried faintly from the creek, and your wife stands at the table counting the last of the scrip left in the tin box on the shelf. The small round tokens clatter softly against the wood. stamped with the company's name, their edges worn smooth from too many hands. They gleam dully in the morning light, not like money, but like reminders. Each one feels like proof that you've traded another week of your life for just enough to keep going. You know they'll be gone by evening. They always are. Your wife lays the scrip out in neat rows, her fingers moving carefully, as if order might make the total stretch further. You stand beside her, already doing the arithmetic in your head. Coffee, flour, salt, soap, lamp oil. The list never changes. There's no room in it for wants, only needs, and even those sometimes get cut short. You tell yourself you'll make it stretch, that maybe the garden will do better this season, or the hens will start laying again. Hope costs nothing, which makes it the one thing you can still afford. She folds the list into her apron pocket, ties her hair back, and nods toward the door. Best get going before the heat sets in, she says. The path to town follows the creek for a while before climbing toward the mine road. Dust hangs in the air like flour, coating your boots and the hem of your wife's skirt. You pass other families on the way, men with empty pockets, women carrying baskets, children trailing behind. No one talks much. There's nothing to say that hasn't been said 100 times before. The road curves around a rise, and then the store appears, sitting squat and square beside the tracks. The same sign still hangs above the door, its paint faded but legible. Cumberland Mining Company Store. The words might as well read, "There's nowhere else." Inside, the air is cooler, shaded by the wide awning outside. The smell hits first, coffee beans, kerosene, and the faint sharpness of tobacco. The shelves are lined with everything a man might need to stay alive, and everything he'll never quite afford. Bolts of fabric, flour sacks, jars of penny candy, shoes too fine for the dirt roads outside. Behind the counter stands the clerk, a thin man with slicked hair and a tired smile. His ledger lies open like a preacher's Bible, waiting to record another round of debts that won't be paid in cash. He nods as you enter, already reaching for his pencil. "Morning to you," he says, the same way he always does, as if courtesy might soften the cost. Your wife moves along the shelves in quiet concentration. She knows the prices better than you do, knows how they creep up by a few cents each month, how the flour bags grow lighter even when the cost doesn't change. She picks what you need with the precision of someone handling a wound. Flour, salt, coffee, lye soap, one small tin of sugar, for the children if the scrip allows. You follow behind her, holding the basket, aware of the weight growing in your arms and the one shrinking in your pocket. Every item has its price printed on a small white tag, but the real cost is something you stopped counting long ago. A few women stand near the counter, bartering what they can: eggs, beans, a jar of jam sealed with wax. The clerk takes each offering, weighing it with the same look of polite pity. You hear one woman ask after her husband's balance, her voice quiet but firm. He flips a few pages in the ledger, frowns slightly, and tells her the debt will clear soon enough. The words are practiced, almost gentle, and you wonder if he believes them himself. She nods, thanks him, and walks out without another word. When it's your turn, you set the basket on the counter. The clerk tallies the items one by one, his pencil scratching quick and even across the page. "That'll be 42 cents in scrip," he says, glancing up. You reach into your pocket, feel the tokens against your palm, and count them out slowly. Each one hits the counter with a soft metallic click, the sound too small to carry the weight behind it. When you finish, there are 3 left. You slide them back into your pocket without thinking. Not enough to buy anything more, but enough to fool yourself into believing you still have something left. Your wife takes the sack of flour while you balance the rest in your arms. The clerk thanks you by name, though his tone carries no meaning. Outside, the sun has climbed higher, spreading heat through the dust and the still air. You adjust your grip on the bundles, feeling the sweat bead along your neck. The road back home, always feels longer than the one here, even though it's the same stretch of dirt. You tell yourself, it's just the weight, but deep down, you know it's something else. The quiet humiliation that comes from buying back the same labour you gave away. You pass a few men still waiting outside, talking low and smoking what's left of their pay in rolled paper. One tips his hat to your wife as you pass, and she nods back politely, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Pride is a fragile thing here, easily bruised but never quite broken. You think of the men who owe more than they earn, who sign their names at the bottom of the ledger, knowing the numbers will never even out. Some of them will leave, chasing rumours of better work somewhere north. Others will stay, too rooted or too tired to try again. You can't say yet which kind you are. By the time you reach the edge of the holler, the air feels thick enough to chew. The creek glints in the sun, shallow and slow. The rocks beneath it, white as bone. Your wife shifts the flour to her other arm and wipes her forehead with her sleeve. The children spot you from the yard and run to meet you. The girl barefoot, the boy waving a stick in triumph, like he's leading a parade. They take the smaller parcels from your hands, eager to help, their faces bright with the excitement of new things. Coffee, sugar, maybe a bit of cloth for mending. You try to match their smiles, though the weight in your chest hasn't eased. Inside the cabin, your wife sets the sacks down on the table and begins to unpack them. She moves through the motions carefully, as if performing a ritual. The sugar goes in the jar by the stove, the flour in its tin, the coffee in its small cloth bag. You watch her hands, steady and sure, and feel both gratitude and shame. Everything she touches is bought with the same dust that coats your lungs, the same hours that vanish underground. The children lean close, watching her pour a little sugar into their palms as a treat. Their laughter fills the room, sweet and unguarded, and for a moment the debt doesn't matter. For a moment, the weight lifts, but as the afternoon stretches on, reality seeps back in. You sit by the door, boots off, listening to the hum of insects and the low murmur of your wife counting again. This time in her head, tallying what's left, what still needs doing, what will run out first. Outside, the sun glares down through the haze, bleaching the road to white. The company store sits somewhere beyond the ridge, waiting quietly for the next week's wages to return to it. You know the routine too well to resent it anymore. The debt, like the hills, isn't something you fight. It's something you live inside. When evening comes, you walk out to the porch. The sun hangs low and red behind the trees, the air still thick with heat. Your wife joins you, resting her elbows on the rail, her apron dusted with flour. The children chase the last bit of daylight through the yard, their laughter fading as shadows grow long. You can hear the faint whistle of the mine from across the valley, marking the end of another shift, the beginning of another cycle. You reach for her hand, rough and warm, and together you watch the sun sink behind the ridge. Sunday comes slow, heavy with heat and the smell of dust. The mine whistle doesn't blow. The tools stay hung on their hooks, and for once the valley feels still. It's the only day that isn't measured in wages or chores. The morning light spills across the hills, in long streaks of gold, touching the tin roofs, the laundry lines, the creek's slow shimmer. You wake later than usual, though late in the holler still means before the sun climbs high. Your wife is already at the basin, washing her hands and face, her hair pinned neatly for once. The children sit quiet, half dressed and half awake, watching her tie the ribbons on your daughter's faded dress. Sunday best doesn't mean much here. Clean is good enough. You scrub your collar, shine your boots as best you can, and try to look a little less like the man who crawled out of the mine the day before. By the time you step outside, the road is already alive with people. Families move in quiet procession toward the ridge where the church sits, their shapes small against the green. Some walk barefoot, shoes slung over their shoulders, to save the souls for later. Others carry Bibles wrapped in cloth to keep out the dust. Children chase each other along the edges of the road until their mothers hiss their names. The sound of it all. Footsteps, laughter, low talk, rises into the morning air like a soft hum. No one rushes. There's nowhere else to be. The church itself is small, white painted, and leaning a little to one side, as if tired from holding so much hope. The steps creak under every foot that climbs them, and the door swings open with a sigh. Inside, the air is thick with heat and the faint sweetness of wood polish. Flies drift lazily through the beams of sunlight that cut across the room. The pews are plain, built from local pine, their surfaces worn smooth by decades of restless hands. A few paper fans sit tucked into hymnals, each printed with the name of a funeral home or seed company. The smell of sweat and soap mixes with the faint tang of kerosene from the lamps that hang along the walls. Someone has placed fresh flowers, wild asters and daisies, in a chipped vase near the pulpit, and they tremble in the faint draught from the open window. You sit with your family near the middle row, where you can see without being seen. Your wife smooths the children's hair, whispers a quiet warning for them to sit still. The boy dangles his feet, his shoes thudding lightly against the floorboards. The girl leans into her mother's shoulder, her eyes half closed from the heat. Around you, the murmuring of voices blends into something steady, like the rustle of leaves in wind. The old men in the back talk about crops, the women fan themselves in slow rhythm, and the children squirm like puppies in the shade. When the preacher steps up to the pulpit, the noise ebbs to quiet. He's a tall man with a grey beard and a voice that fills the room before he even speaks loud. His Bible is worn soft from use, pages curled and yellowed at the edges. He clears his throat and begins, his words rolling out slow and deliberate, carrying the cadence of someone used to speaking over wind and work. He talks about trials, about patience, about the reward that waits beyond this life, if only you endure this one with grace. It's a message everyone here already knows by heart, but they listen anyway. In a place where change never comes, faith becomes a kind of motion, a way to keep walking without moving at all. You watch the faces around you as he speaks. Some nod in agreement, others stare straight ahead, eyes unfocused. Your wife listens quietly, hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable but calm. You think of how she spends 6 days keeping the house alive, how the 7th is the only one where she sits still long enough to catch her breath. The preacher's words roll over her like a soft tide, promising a rest she'll never see in this world. You can't decide if that comforts you or makes you angry. Maybe both. When the sermon ends, the preacher wipes his brow and closes the Bible with a clap. "Let us sing," he says, and the congregation rises as one. The shape note hymnals come out, thin, frayed at the corners, marked with penciled initials from generations past. The first chord hums low, unsure, until the voices find each other. You join in, your voice rough from dust and disuse, but it doesn't matter. No one here sings to sound good. The song isn't about harmony, it's about proof. Proof that you're still here, still breathing, still capable of praise. The sound fills the small room, rising to the rafters, slipping through the open windows, rolling down the holler. The words are simple and old, about rest, about home, about light at the end of labour. The voices crack and waver, some sharp, some flat, but together they make something whole. The children sing too, their voices high and clear above the deeper ones. Your daughter leans against her mother, humming a note she doesn't quite know, and your son stands straight beside you, his brow furrowed in concentration. You can feel the boards under your feet vibrate with the rhythm of so many bodies breathing the same air, singing the same hope. Outside, the sun burns hotter, the air shimmering beyond the windows. Sweat runs down the sides of your neck, and the fabric of your shirt sticks to your back, but still you sing. The hymn stretches on, verse after verse, and for a while it feels like the whole valley has joined in. You imagine the sound rolling through the trees, over the creek, up the slopes, until even the hills are humming along. When the final note comes, it lingers in the air for a heartbeat before dissolving into silence. Then comes the faint shuffle of feet, the scrape of benches, the low murmur of voices returning to earth. Outside the church, people linger in the yard, talking in small circles under the shade of the oak trees. Children chase each other around the graves behind the building, their laughter mixing with the drone of cicadas. Someone passes around a basket of biscuits, another pours lemonade from a glass jar that sweats in the heat. Your wife trades a few words with the women from down the holler, nodding and smiling the way neighbours do when there's nothing new to tell. The preacher stands by the steps, shaking hands, his smile warm but weary. You sit on the low rail near the road, watching it all unfold. The hymn still hums faintly in your ears, the words echoing like a promise half believed. The valley feels different now, not lighter, not freer, but steadier. The hills are quiet, listening, the same people who will rise tomorrow before dawn, who will return to the mine and the wash and the garden, stand here now with their eyes lifted towards something they can't see. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it has to be. As the sun tilts west, the families begin to drift home. The white church grows smaller behind you, its paint peeling, its bells silent until next week. The sound of the hymn still lingers, stretched thin over the valley like mist. You walk beside your wife, her hand resting lightly against your arm, the children skipping ahead through the dust. The road hums with the drone of insects, the slow murmur of the creek hidden behind the trees. For a moment, the echoes blend, the memory of voices, the steady buzz of cicadas, the water's low whisper. Together, they sound almost like prayer, fading gently down the holler until the hills take the rest. As the weeks pass by, the hills change colours, and with them, so does the rhythm of your days. Summer's thick heat fades, giving way to the sharp, brittle air of autumn. The leaves turn red and gold, burning bright for a moment before they let go. You gather what you can from the garden before the frost sets in. The last crooked beans, the small potatoes, the half-grown squash that won't last long. Your wife lines the jars on the shelves, wiping the dust from each lid, as though blessing them. You count them by habit, not out of distrust, but out of need. Every sealed jar a promise that winter won't take more than it has to. The children help where they can, their hands small but quick, their laughter thin in the chill air. When the first cold wind blows through the holler, carrying the smell of smoke and wet leaves, you know what's coming. The lean months never surprise you anymore. By December, the ground is too hard to work, the creek's edges crusted with ice. The mine still runs, but slower, with fewer shifts to go around. Some men wait days for work that doesn't come, standing in the cold outside the company office, their breath rising in pale clouds. Those who are lucky enough to get a day inside come home coated in frost, as well as coal dust, their clothes stiff and their hands raw. At night, you all sit closer to the stove, the children wrapped in quilts, the room glowing dimly from the firelight. The wind presses against the walls, like a living thing, rattling the loose boards, finding every gap you haven't yet stuffed with rags. Your wife keeps a pot of beans simmering low, stretching each meal with cornbread and hope. The smell of smoke lingers in everything. Hair, clothes, blankets, dreams. The days grow short and silent. Snow falls sometimes, soft and clean, blanketing the valley in stillness. It's beautiful, if you forget what it means. The path to the creek turns slick with ice, and fetching water becomes a careful, deliberate thing. You chop wood until your hands ache, stacking it under the eaves where it stays barely dry. The children's cheeks are red from the cold, their laughter muffled by scarves. Their games slower now that their fingers stiffen so easily. Nights are long. The sound of the fire fills the house, steady but small. You've learned not to speak much during these months. Words burn energy that needs saving. When the food starts to thin, your wife takes stock again. She measures flour by touch, sugar by instinct. The garden's memory fills the shelves. Pickles, peaches, beans. But every jar opened feels like losing a little more security. You trade a bit of scrip for lard and coffee at the store. The clerk's smile tight as ever. There's no need to say what you're both thinking. Everyone in the holler is getting by the same way, waiting for the thaw. Hunger becomes a quiet companion, not loud enough to panic, just steady enough to remind you that comfort was never promised here. Sickness moves through the valley when the cold is at its worst. A cough here, a fever there. It doesn't take much for a household to fall under it. The air inside is heavy with the scent of kerosene and pine salve. You remember the night your son took ill, his breathing shallow, his face flushed bright against the dark. Your wife sat beside him for hours, whispering hymns under her breath. A damp cloth pressed to his head. The sound of her voice was soft but unrelenting, a prayer against silence. He pulled through, though it took everything both of you had. When dawn finally came, she slumped against the wall, too tired to cry, too grateful to sleep. The cabin smelled of medicine and sweat and smoke, but it also smelled of survival. That's what passes for victory here. When winter finally breaks, it doesn't do it kindly. The first thaw brings mud instead of warmth, flood instead of freedom. The creek swells with meltwater, brown and fast, dragging whole branches down its current. Some years it rises over the banks and swallows the garden fence, undoing months of work in a single day. You stand on the porch, helpless, watching the water move. It's easy to imagine it washing everything away. The debts, the years, the tired rhythm of labour and worry. But it never does. When it finally drains, it leaves only silt, ruin, and the same stubborn land waiting to be worked again. Spring comes slow, almost grudgingly. The air turns soft again, but the ground stays slick and cold. You and your wife turn the soil anyway, boots sinking deep with every step. The boy trails behind with the hoe, the girl carrying a basket of seed. The garden looks smaller than you remember, the earth pale and scarred, but she plants it like she always does. Patient, careful, quiet. The smell of dirt and thaw fills the air, raw and new. You can feel the hills waking up around you, the trees budding, the birds returning. Even the mine whistle sounds different now. Less like command, more like habit. The hunger doesn't end when the frost does. It lingers in the body, in the way your hands shake when you first hold fresh food again. The first green things that push through the soil are tiny, fragile, but they feel like a kind of mercy. The children crouch low beside the rows, pointing at the sprouts as if they're miracles. Your wife kneels in the dirt, brushing her fingers over the leaves, her face calm but tired. She doesn't smile, not yet. Hope is too costly to spend early. She simply nods once, as if confirming what she already knew, that life, for all its meanness, still insists on coming back. By the time the days grow longer again, the valley looks different. The hills glow with new green, and the creek runs clear where it once ran brown. You still work the same hours, breathe the same dust, carry the same debts, but something inside you lightens with the season. It's not joy. You've forgotten what that feels like, but it's close enough. In the holler, survival is the only kind of progress that counts. You live by endurance, not ambition, and every spring that follows a winter like this one feels like proof that endurance is enough. You sit on the porch one evening, watching the light fade across the hills. The children chase each other in the yard, the sound of their laughter carried by the wind. Your wife sits beside you, sewing quietly, her needle glinting in the last of the sun. The smell of wet soil drifts from the garden, and in it there's something sweet. A promise maybe, or just the memory of it. Down by the creek, the frogs begin their chorus, and the hills hum with new life. You look toward the garden once more and see the first shoots standing in the fading light, thin, green, and trembling, but still upright. They won't all make it, but some will, and that's enough to keep you working. The lean months have passed for now, though you know they'll come again. They always do. Still, the sight of those fragile stems, defiant against the cooling air, feels like a small victory, proof that the earth, no matter how worn, still remembers how to begin again. The hills keep their own kind of silence, but every so often something manages to break through it. The radio arrived the way most things do in the holler, used, dented, and passed down from someone who'd already squeezed the best out of it. Your neighbour traded it for a sack of potatoes and a promise to help mend his fence come spring. It's an ugly thing, all knobs and rusted wire, but to your children, it might as well be magic. You set it on the shelf beside the stove, its black casing scuffed and humming faintly, even when it's off. The power comes from a car battery you recharged once in town. The wires twisted like a secret only you understand. The first time it comes to life spitting static into the cabin, everyone stops what they're doing. Even your wife looks up from the table, her hands stilling over the mending. For a long moment, no one breathes. Then through the static, a voice cuts through, thin, distant, but human. The announcer speaks too fast at first, words tumbling over one another. Names you barely recognise, cities, ball players, a mention of Washington. You twist the dial gently, chasing clarity that never fully comes. The sound wavers, fading in and out, but when it sharpens for a heartbeat, it feels like you're touching the edge of another world. The children lean close, wide-eyed. Your son whispers. He sounds like he's standing right outside, and you nod, though you both know he isn't. The voice belongs to somewhere else entirely, somewhere flat and bright and unimaginable. As the weeks pass, the radio becomes its own kind of hearth. Every evening after supper, you pull the battery out from under the shelf and wire it up, careful not to cross the leads. The static starts soft and grows until it fills the room like wind through trees. You tune slow, finding what signals you can. The low rumble of music from Nashville, the clipped reports from Washington. Sometimes even a preacher shouting about salvation through the crackle. The sound never lasts long before it breaks apart again, but no one leaves until it does. The children sit cross-legged on the floor, their faces lit by the small lamp, and your wife leans forward with her chin in her hand, listening to songs she's never heard but seems to recognise anyway. Once, late on a Saturday night, you catch a baseball game broadcast clear as daylight. The announcer's voice rises and falls with every pitch, naming teams you've only ever read about. You picture the crowd he describes, thousands of people cheering together under bright electric lights, the crack of the bat echoing through a city far too big to imagine. Your son listens, eyes wide, trying to follow every word. When the broadcast fades mid-inning, he looks at you, puzzled, and asks who won. You shrug and tell him maybe they'll finish it tomorrow, though you both know the signal won't return the same way twice. The president's voice comes through one evening, his words slow and calm, like someone trying to talk the whole country through a bad dream. You catch only pieces, hard times, recovery, American spirit. You can hear the weight in his tone, even through the static. The room grows still. Your wife wipes her hands on her apron and sits down beside you. She doesn't ask if you think he's telling the truth. You both know better than to expect answers from a box. Still, when the speech ends and the silence rushes back in, the cabin feels different, as though for a moment the world remembered you were here. Not everything the radio brings is comfort. Some nights, the signal catches the edges of something foreign, languages you can't place, songs that sound lonely even without words. Once you hear the faint echo of a church choir, voices rising and falling like waves, and for a heartbeat, you mistake it for the one up the ridge. It fades before the hymn can end. The strangeness of it lingers. The children ask where those voices come from, and you tell them, nowhere close, though the truth is you don't really know. The radio pulls sound from the air like ghosts from fog, distant, fragile, impossible to hold. The contrast between that invisible world and the holler grows sharper the longer you listen. Out there, people drive cars down paved streets, eat food they didn't grow, watch electric lights flicker on with the turn of a switch. Out there, time seems to move faster. In here, you measure it by chores, by seasons, by the way the hills darken at dusk. When you turn off the radio, the silence feels heavier than before. The wind outside hums through the cracks in the wall, and the creek gurgles softly, as though mocking the voices that tried to cross the miles. Still, you power it up again the next night, because distance is easier to live with when you can hear it. Sometimes the radio brings music so faint it feels like memory instead of sound. A fiddle tune drifting through the static, a woman's voice singing about love and loss, her accent soft but sure. Your wife closes her eyes when those songs come on, and you can tell she's somewhere else entirely. Not gone, just remembering that there's a world beyond the valley. When the music fades, she sighs quietly and gets back to her sewing, the needle's rhythm almost matching the one that's just disappeared. On good nights, when the air is clear and the battery strong, the signal holds long enough for everyone to forget where they are. You sit close together in the dim light, your son asking questions about the cities he's never seen, your daughter swaying to a tune that slips in and out of hearing. The cabin smells of oil and dust and supper cooling on the stove. The static rises and falls like a tide, and for a while, it feels like the hills themselves are breathing with it. The outside world seems close enough to touch, though you know it's only sound. A door that never quite opens. When the battery starts to fade, the voices grow slower, deeper, until they're little more than a hum. Your wife reaches over and turns the knob gently, the sound shrinking to a whisper, then to silence. The children are half asleep by then, their heads resting against each other. Their faces lit by the last glow of the lamp. You sit for a while in the quiet that follows, listening to the faint ring in your ears. The creek murmurs outside, steady and familiar, the crickets joining in with their endless song. You finally blow out the lamp, and darkness folds around the room. The air is warm, still heavy with the smell of smoke and bread. Somewhere far away, in some city you'll never see, the broadcast continues. Songs, speeches, laughter, all spilling into the night. But here, the sound has vanished back into the air, leaving only the hum of insects and the gentle breathing of your family. You lie down, eyes open for a moment longer, hearing the echo of that distant world fading into static and then into nothing. The holler returns to silence, and the silence, as always, feels alive. A few years pass. The mine doesn't roar the way it used to. Fewer carts rattle down the tracks now, and the air above the ridge no longer carries that low hum of machinery that once marked the rhythm of every day. The whistle still blows in the mornings, but not as often, and sometimes it stays silent for days. When it finally does call out again, it sounds less like command and more like memory, a thin, tired note that echoes through the valley before dying out against the hills. You still wake before dawn, though some mornings you lie there longer, listening. You can tell by the stillness what kind of day it will be. If the whistle doesn't sound by sunrise, there's no use walking down to the shaft. The men who do go wait around the yard, smoking and kicking at stones, watching the foreman's office for movement. A few are called forward for a shift, but most are turned away with nothing more than a shrug. They head home slow, shoulders low, the sound of their boots dull on the frozen ground. You've had those mornings yourself, standing in that same cold, hat in hand, wondering if maybe tomorrow will be different. The company says, it's just a slump. Demand will rise again, the clerk tells anyone who asks, as though saying it often enough might make it true. But you can see the truth in the stockpile of coal that never leaves the yard, in the carts rusting by the fence line, in the men who pack their belongings onto wagons and head north in search of something better. Each week another house goes empty. Curtains stay drawn, gardens go wild, doors hang open to the wind. The children in the holler have fewer playmates now. The laughter that once drifted from every yard has grown thin, carried off by distance. Inside the mine, things are different too. The tunnels feel wider than they used to, quieter. Fewer lamps burn underground. Fewer voices echo through the seams. When you do get a shift, you work beside men who barely speak anymore, each lost in his own thoughts. The rhythm of picks against the rock no longer feels like progress. It's a kind of defiance, a way to remind the mountain that you still exist. The dust hangs thick as ever, coating everything in grey. You cough more now, the sound deeper, heavier. Some nights when you lie down, you can feel the weight of it pressing against your chest, a slow grinding ache that doesn't fade until morning. You've seen what that cough becomes in older men. It doesn't take them quick, just quietly. There's talk of a strike at first, though no one says the word too loud. The union men from out of town come through, their suits too clean for this place, their promises too smooth. They hand out pamphlets that talk about dignity and wages, about rights and fairness. The younger miners listen with fire in their eyes, ready to fight for something they've never had. The older ones, men like you, listen in silence. You've seen strikes before. You've seen what happens when the company fights back. How long hunger can last when pay stops altogether. Still, when the talk grows serious and the picket signs start to appear, you find yourself among the crowd. Maybe it's pride, or maybe just the need to believe you can still change something before it changes you. The strike doesn't last long. It never does. The company has time and money, and the men have neither. A few get what they wanted. Better hours, maybe an extra dime a ton, but most go back to work just grateful to be taken on again. Others don't return at all. They move their families west, toward the cities they've heard about on the radio, where the factories still run and the lights never go out. You can't blame them for leaving. You think about it sometimes yourself, but the thought of starting over somewhere flat and strange feels heavier than staying put. The holler is hard, but at least it's familiar. The town around the mine begins to hollow out, along with the mountain. The company store shortens its hours, the shelves thinning like the people who shop there. The church pews stand half empty on Sundays. Even the sound of the creek changes. It runs clearer now, unclouded by silt, as if nature itself has started reclaiming what's left. The silence between the hills grows thicker. Nights stretch longer, filled with the sound of coughing from nearby cabins and the wind dragging loose tin across rooftops. Some evenings you walk past the mine yard just to see what's become of it. The machinery stands still, wheels half buried in mud. The tracks that once carried carts to the tipple are overgrown with weeds. The air smells of rust and damp earth instead of smoke. You can still picture it how it used to be. Men shouting over the noise, carts clattering, lamps swinging in the dark. But the memory already feels distant, like it belonged to someone else's life. The young boys who once waited at the gate for their turn now stand idle, hands in pockets, their futures shrinking as fast as the work. Your wife says the quiet isn't all bad. The hills sound like themselves again, she tells you one morning, standing by the window while the mist burns off the ridge. She's right, though you can't bring yourself to agree out loud. The quiet feels too much like surrender. You miss the noise, even the kind that used to grate on you. The whistle, the carts, the pick striking stone. Without it, time loses its edges. The days blend into one another, marked only by small things. The crackle of the stove, the cough that wakes you before dawn, the faraway bark of a dog that no longer has a master to feed it. The decline creeps through everything, like slow rot. The houses sag under their own weight, fences lean, gardens go untended. A few men take up timber work, or odd jobs patching roofs, but the pay never lasts. Those who stay behind gather on porches in the evenings, talking low, pretending they don't notice the emptiness settling around them. You still visit the mine gates sometimes, even when there's no reason. The whistle hasn't sounded in weeks, but habit is hard to break. Then one morning, without warning, it calls out again. The sound catches you in the yard, mid-step, startling a flock of birds from the trees. It's the same note you've heard every day for years, but now it sounds different, hollow, drawn out, like a farewell. You stop where you are and listen. The hills carry the echo farther than usual, softening it until it fades into nothing. You stand there long after it ends, the silence that follows feeling heavier than the sound itself. By dusk, word spreads that the company is closing the shaft for good. The coal's too deep, the profits too thin, and no one left to dig for less. Some curse, some weep, some just sit quietly and stare at the ground. You walk home slow, dust rising with every step, the air tasting of metal and memory. When you reach the porch, the lamp inside flickers, and your wife looks up from her sewing, waiting for you to speak. You don't. There's nothing to say. The hills stand dark against the fading light, their outlines calm and unchanging. Seasons pass by. The mine's whistle hasn't sounded in years now, but you still wake before dawn, as if your body refuses to forget the rhythm. The habit is too deep to lose, carved into your bones by years of repetition. The world outside the cabin lies quiet beneath the mist, the kind of stillness that feels like memory more than peace. The tracks near the old shaft are half buried now, the rails swallowed by grass. The tipple leans at an angle against the sky, its boards grey and splintered. You sometimes walk there in the evenings, just to listen. There's no echo anymore, no clang of steel or murmur of men, only the wind threading through the beams and the drip of water from somewhere unseen. The valley has started taking it back, slow and patient, the way it always does. Those who could leave have gone. Their houses stand hollow, windows open to rain and wind. The ones who stayed have grown quieter, their faces marked by the same tired understanding that hangs over every generation here. Leaving doesn't always mean freedom, and staying doesn't always mean failure. A few men still gather at the store steps on Saturdays, though there's little to buy and even less to talk about. The clerk keeps the doors open out of habit more than profit. Sometimes he lets the children take candy from the jar, just to keep the ritual alive. You nod to him when you pass, and he nods back, both of you knowing there's comfort in small continuities. Life goes on, but slower now. The days stretch long between events worth mentioning. You work small patches of ground, behind the cabin, enough to fill a few jars each summer. Your wife keeps chickens, though hawks take more than their share. The children have grown, their faces older than their years, their laughter quieter but still there when you listen for it. Your son talks sometimes about leaving for the city, following a cousin who writes home about steady work and electric lights. You tell him to go if he must, though a part of you knows he never truly will. The hills hold on to people in ways they can't explain. It's not the land's beauty that keeps them. It's the gravity of familiarity, the knowledge that even hardship feels like home when it's the only thing you've ever known. The church still opens its doors each Sunday, though the congregation has thinned. The pews creak the same way they always have, and the hymnals are patched with tape where pages tore years ago. The preacher's voice has softened with age, his sermons less about salvation and more about endurance. The graves behind the church stretch farther than they once did, the names fading under moss and weather. You walk among them sometimes after service, tracing the worn carvings with your fingers. Fathers, sons, mothers, children, all resting in the same red earth. The generations overlap, the same names repeating like verses in an old song. Your parents lie there, and their parents before them. Someday, you will too. It doesn't frighten you. The soil here is familiar. It knows your story as well as you do. The hills themselves seem unchanged, though you know better. Trees have crept into the clearings where cabins once stood. The old footpaths have narrowed to deer trails. Even the creek has shifted its course, cutting a new bend through the lower field. Yet when the fog settles and the cicadas hum, it feels like the same place you've always known. A world caught between memory and motion. The mountains don't hurry, and they don't forget. They've seen people come and go, fortunes rise and fall, minds open and close. They've swallowed it all, layer upon layer, until the scars of labour look like part of the landscape. Sometimes you think about the people who left, the ones who traded these ridges for streets and smokestacks. You wonder if they ever dream of this place, if the sound of wind through trees still visits them in the quiet hours. Maybe they tell their children about the hills, about the smell of coal smoke in winter and the way the stars looked when the lights went out. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they decided it was kinder to let the memory fade, but the hills remember for them. Every echo, every footprint, every laugh that ever bounced off these slopes. It's all here, buried deep in the soil. Your wife still hums as she works, though the tunes have changed. Sometimes she sings along to the radio, which still manages to catch a signal on clear nights. The voices drift through the cabin like ghosts, songs from cities you'll never see, speeches from men you'll never meet. The sound seems softer now, as if the distance between your world and theirs has grown wider. When the static grows too loud, she turns the knob, and the silence rushes back in. It's not empty silence, though. It's full of small, living things. The chirp of crickets, the whisper of the creek, the crackle of the fire. After all these years, that's the sound of endurance. Your daughter visits often, bringing her own children now. They run barefoot through the yard the way she once did, chasing chickens and splashing in the creek. Their laughter fills the air, high and bright, echoing off the hills like something the valley has been waiting to hear again. You sit on the porch and watch them, your hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, gone cold. Time folds strangely in those moments, past and present overlapping, one fading into the other. The world beyond the ridge may have changed, but here it still moves at the speed of seasons. As the years stretch on, the cabin weathers but endures. The roof leaks a little more each winter, the porch leans farther toward the creek, but the walls hold. The same smoke curls from the chimney each morning, thin and grey against the pale sky. You know one day it will stop, the way everything does, but not yet. The land has seen too many endings to treat them like tragedies. Around here, even loss becomes another form of belonging. Evening settles slow over the holler, the kind of quiet light that makes the air itself feel tired. You walk out to the porch and sit beside your wife, the boards warm beneath your feet. The fields are darkening, the last smoke from supper fires drifting upward in thin ribbons. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once, then goes quiet. The creek hums its steady tune, unchanged by all the years it's carried through. Down the valley, you can almost hear the faint echo of a hymn, the same kind they've sung in the church for as long as anyone can remember. The sound is soft, distant, but it lingers. You look out across the hills as dusk deepens, their outlines turning to shadow against the fading sky. The world beyond them keeps changing, racing ahead with inventions and wars and noise, but here, the mountains keep their own counsel. They remember every life lived in their shade, every laugh and grief, every strike of the pick and cry of the newborn. The cabins may rot, the mines may fill with water, but the memory stays folded into the ridges like veins of coal. The air cools, and the smoke from the chimneys twists higher, carrying the scent of wood and living. As darkness settles, you close your eyes and listen. The wind sighs through the trees, the crickets sing, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a single voice begins another hymn, low and clear. The sound drifts down the holler, winding through the night air until it fades into the steady pulse of the earth itself. You breathe it in, slow and easy, knowing it will outlast you. The hills remember what the world forgets, and in their long, patient way, they keep you remembered too. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Rich Davis. Sleep well.